Hey, Dr. Firnhaber here. It's Wednesday and it's time for 10 minutes of truth. So, today I want to talk to you about some information, research out of a book that I recently read called The Gut-Brain Paradox by Stephen Gundry. This is his latest book. I think he's written about 6 of them, and this is the second one of his that I've read. This is a tremendously important book, and I would even recommend that any of you out there who have any inclination, you read it. So, if I were to look at the 3 most important systems of the body that create health, not that create life, because that would be the heart and the lungs and obviously the brain, but that create health. I would say, for sure, the nervous system. We got to have a functioning nervous system to be healthy. Number 2 is the gut microbiome. The collection of gut bacteria in our GI tract has an enormous influence on health. And I would say number 3 is our systems of detoxification. So today I'm going to be talking about number 2 is the gut microbiome. Now, the gut microbiome, as many of you probably know, is this collection of gut bacteria that each one of us have that are completely unique to us. What's happened over the last 10 years is that there's been an absolute explosion of research in understanding how the gut bacteria, this collection of gut microbes, affects our health. And what we're finding out is that it really affects every aspect of our health, everything. So today I'm going to just talk about one thing, and that's addictions. So a lot of people are addicted to foods, they're addicted to sugar, they're addicted to ultra-processed foods. So what does that have to do with the gut microbiome? Well, what we're finding out is that the gut microbiome actually will either feed or enhance our addictions, or it will keep us eating healthy. So how does that work? Well, with a balanced microbiome, I'm just going to quote Dr. Gundry here. With a balanced microbiome, we begin to crave foods and things that are good for us instead of those that are addictive or harmful. And when we feed the bad bugs in our gut, the exact opposite happens. So how do we get addictions? How do those develop? Well, let's just talk about an addiction to soda pop. Now, we could be talking about an addiction to anything, and we'll talk about those things. So when you start drinking soda, and you just start doing that over and over and over, and you get in the habit of drinking it, what happens is that certain gut bacteria are killed off by the soda, and certain gut bacteria actually thrive. And the ones that thrive are the ones that depend on soda pop to live. So what happens is those gut bacteria signal the brain to keep drinking soda. So you develop addiction to soda by changing the composition of your gut bacteria. Now, you say, that's pretty strange because, that's different than what I've heard. Yeah, it is. And what we're finding out now is that science, as you know, evolves. Truth tends to evolve over time. What we thought was absolute truth years ago regarding science has changed a little bit. And now we know that when we do something, when we consume something over and over and over, we create gut bacteria that feed on whatever that is, that signal our brain to where we want more of that. So let's talk about alcohol addiction. Alcohol addiction is the same way. What researchers have found, when I say they, researchers have found that people, for example, let me quote this here. As studies have noted, gut dysbiosis is associated with metabolic changes that affect the behavior and neurobiological processes involved in alcohol addiction. For example, a study of binge drinkers in their teens and early 20s showed that binge drinking, and specifically cravings for alcohol, were associated with distinct microbiome alterations. Another compelling study showed that patients who suffered from alcohol addiction, had leaky guts, and altered terrain continued to experience depression, anxiety, and alcohol cravings after going through alcohol detoxification programs. Why is that? Because their gut bacteria had not been altered to stop the addictions. Now, here's another interesting study on alcohol addiction. Studies looking at treating alcoholism via the microbiome are very promising. In a well-designed study, patients suffering from alcohol addiction received either a fecal microbiome transplant or a placebo. 90% of the group that received the fecal microbiome transplant and 30% of the placebo group experienced significant decreases in alcohol cravings and improvement in cognition and quality of life. In fact, I believe, and I will go through this probably in another 10 minutes of truth, that fecal transplant, from everything that I've read, is probably the key to obesity, the key to getting rid of obesity. So studies have shown that if you transplant, and they've seen this in mice, and I know it's happened in humans too. If you take a thin mouse and do a fecal transplant from a fat mouse into a thin mouse, the mouse will get fat. If you take a fat mouse, do a fecal transplant from a thin mouse into the fat mouse will start losing weight without even doing anything different. So I personally think, this is my opinion, but I think there's good science behind it, that fecal transplant makes a lot more sense for obesity and weight loss than Ozempic, which is very expensive and has tremendous side effects. Now, I got off the track there a little bit, but here, when we look at the opioid epidemic and gut dysbiosis, it's no different. Let me just read you some passages from this book. NSAIDs, or non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, shift the composition of the microbiome so it is dominated by gram-negative rather than gram-positive bacteria. They also increase the relative abundance of specific pathogenic and pro-inflammatory bacteria, such as Enterococcus, and reduce the abundance of protective species, such as Lactospiraceae and Ruminococciae, both of which produce the all-important butyrate, which protects our brains and gut walls. One study showed that people who took non-steroidal anti-inflammatories for osteoarthritis ended up with more inflammation and poorer cartilage quality compared to the control group. Well, of course they did. Non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs drive dysbiosis, which lead to inflammation, which lead to pain, which leads to more NSAIDs, which leads to more dysbiosis, more inflammation, and more pain. Where does it end? So if you're taking opioid drugs, okay, they change the microbiome as well. Now, in the past, I've done talks on 10 Minutes of Truth showing how non-steroidal anti-inflammatories changed the gut dysbiosis or the gut bacteria. And we've known about that actually for a while, for multiple years. But I want you to understand that if you're suffering from any addiction, whether it's alcohol, opioids, food addiction, cigarette addiction, it doesn't matter. When you fix the microbiome, that addiction tends to get better. So the more you consume something that isn't good for you, the more it changes alters the microbiome, which sends signals to the brain to consume more of it. So I would recommend this. In order to help stop some of these cravings, some of these addictions, a gut healing protocol is probably something that would be very good. And that's what we do in our office. And I don't, the fecal transplant is not as well, as widely performed as I think it should be and as I wish it were. And it almost seems pretty disgusting when you think about it. The thing is, it's very simple and it actually works. So the other thing to do would be a gut healing protocol, which we do in our office. So this is what I'm going to be concentrating on in the next several weeks is the gut-brain paradox, how our microbiome affects so much of our health. And so if you're interested in more of this, you're interested in a gut healing protocol and doing some microbiome testing, we do that here in the office. And I'd be happy to talk to you about that. Our number is 402-488-2220. We're here in Lincoln, Nebraska. Give us a call. We'll be glad to help you. We'll see you next week.